Imagine the lanterns in Chang'an, still glow warm against winter air, still painting the street in honeyed light, when a drum cracks the night like a fist on a coffin. You see revelers freeze mid-laugh. You feel the silk of your courier sash turn heavy as if it already soaks with sweat. A runner shoves a sealed message into your hands, wax smeared, fingerprints torn, therefore your golden city suddenly tastes like iron because a single name rides inside it, and Lushan. Imagine your post is small, palace guard, corridor courier, therefore your life usually moves in tidy lines, ink to paper, paper to hand, hand to door. You see ministers in clean robes glide like swans between carved pillars. You smell incense that clings to cedar beams and makes even worry feel ceremonial. You hear poets in the outer courts argue over a rhyme as if the empire itself has time to spare. But the message in your fist is not tidy. The wax looks bruised, pressed while running, therefore the first sensation is not fear but offense, an insult to order. You step into a corridor where laughter still exists. You pass lacquered screens painted with mountains that never move, therefore the stillness mocks the urgency in your feet. You see a eunuch glance at the seal and swallow. You feel a shift in the air, like the palace breathes in and forgets how to exhale. A soft voice says the ugly word, careful, as if speaking it might summon it, and Lushan. Imagine the northeast frontier far beyond these walls, snow fields, horse sweat, watchtowers, yet suddenly it stands inside Chang'an like a shadow in daylight. You see the message passed into a chamber, and the door closes with a gentleness that feels wrong. You hear murmurs leak through carved wood, scouts, numbers, roads, loyalty. But the numbers do not match. One scout swears 10,000. Another swears 50,000. You don't know which is worse, the smaller force that moves like a knife, or the larger one that rolls like a flood. Therefore uncertainty becomes a weapon before any arrow flies. You stand in a corridor and feel your stomach tighten, because the frontier general who once raises a cup to the son of heaven now marches on him. Imagine stepping out of the palace into the city as if nothing changes. You see New Year charms, bright red paper hanging from bamboo stalls. Promises of luck curl at their corners in the cold. You smell fried dough and sweet wine. You hear vendors sing prices like blessings. But the drum tower no longer beats festival rhythm. Therefore, every cheerful sound feels borrowed. You watch a man fold a charm with careful fingers, but his eyes keep lifting toward the northern road. Therefore, even superstition looks like surveillance. You feel your own breath in your scarf, hot and anxious, because the city still performs happiness while the frontier unravels. Imagine climbing the wall at dusk, because duty demands eyes. You see the fields beyond Chang'an flatten into gray, then disappear into distance. You expect darkness. But watchfires bloom on the horizon, one, then three, then a cluster, therefore night itself seems infected. You feel cold stone under your palms, and it does not comfort. You hear the drum tower again, alarm cadence, therefore the city's heartbeat changes. Your golden age suddenly feels like a lacquered bowl striking stone, beautiful, then shattered. Yet the bowl does not shatter in one clean break. It splinters slowly, therefore the mind refuses to accept it. Imagine the next days in Chang'an, where panic moves faster than horses. You see officials send servants to buy grain in secret. You smell fresh sacks of millet being dragged into private storehouses. You hear doors bolt earlier than usual. But the public squares still fill with people pretending the sky is not falling. Therefore, rumor becomes a second weather system, blowing through alleys, turning faces pale. You see a mother trade a jade hairpin for a sack of coarse grain. You feel the weight of that exchange in your chest because beauty becomes food, therefore status becomes survival. The bright red charms curl tighter in the cold air, their color turning into a cruel joke. Imagine being summoned again and again, not for battle, but for movement, dispatches, orders, corrections, reversals. You see ink still wet when a hand snatches the paper away. You hear a minister speak confidence, but his fingers tremble against his sleeve. But every confident sentence carries a second meaning. Please believe this. Therefore, language itself starts to fail. You feel your feet blister under boots, because the city asks you to run its fear from room to room. You don't know if the message you carry saves the empire or merely delays its collapse by an afternoon. Imagine the road toward Tong Pass, China's throat between mountains. Therefore, every step feels like moving toward a mouth that might swallow you. You see carts jammed wheel to wheel. You smell mule dung and cold sweat, the sour odor of too many bodies forced into one narrow path. You hear monks chant prayers over crying children. You see soldiers with mismatched armor. One man wears a polished helmet, another ties wooden slats to his chest with rope. But nobody moves fast. Therefore, logistics becomes the enemy. Every mile, you feel the Empire's weight, too heavy to turn quickly, too proud to admit it cannot pivot. Imagine trying to push through that road as a courier. You see faces turn toward your sash, hoping for good news, fearing bad. You feel hands tug at your sleeve, begging, cursing, pleading for a place on a cart. But the paper in your pouch cannot feed them. Therefore, you keep moving while guilt clings like smoke. You step around a toppled bundle of scrolls, abandoned in mud, because someone chooses food over record. You don't know if those words ever matter again. Imagine arriving near Tong Pass and seeing the mountains squeeze the world into a single hard corridor. You see ramparts bite into rock. You feel wind cut through your layers, sharp as a reprimand. You hear the clink of metal as soldiers test bowstrings with numb fingers. But the camp's confidence looks staged. Therefore, you watch eyes instead of banners. You see men glance toward the command tents as if the tents hold not strategy but fate. Orders change mid-sentence. A superior says the pass holds. Another whispers that court factions cut each other's legs out. Therefore, you learn a new truth. Danger comes from inside your own ranks as often as it comes from the road ahead. Imagine standing near a fire pit where thin porridge simmers. You see grains swirl in water like dust in a puddle. You smell it, warm but weak. You feel your belly clench as if it tries to eat itself. You chew dried bean cake until your jaw aches, because chewing tricks the body into thinking it is fed. But hunger is not polite. Therefore, hunger makes men quiet, then cruel. Somewhere nearby, someone boils leather, quietly, so nobody sees how desperate it gets. You hear the soft scrape of knife on boot, the hush of shame. You feel cold in your fingertips that never fully leaves, because hunger and winter conspire. Imagine a day when refugees begin flowing the wrong way, toward Chang'an, not away. You see their feet wrapped in rags. You smell unwashed bodies in fear. You hear a man insist Luoyang falls. Another swears the rebels proclaim their own dynasty, as if naming a thing makes it real. But nobody agrees on details. Therefore, the mind fills gaps with nightmares. You watch a child clutch a broken flute, eyes too old for his face. You feel your throat tighten, because the world flips like a table and everyone scrambles for whatever does not slide off. Imagine a messenger arrives with news that a great commander is accused, removed, humiliated. Therefore, a clean blade is replaced with a dull one. You see officers avoid each other's gaze. You hear voices drop when names are spoken. But the enemy does not need to win every fight if trust collapses. Therefore, confidence dies in real time, quietly in the eyes. You don't know whether the next order comes from strategy or from rivalry. You only know you're expected to obey either way. Imagine the decisive minute at Tong Pass when the air changes, not colder, wrong. You see birds lift suddenly from scrub as if the ground itself snarls. You feel a hush spread, like the mountains hold their breath. Then sound arrives, a distant roar of thousands of throats, and under it the hard clatter of metal on rock. Therefore, the body reacts before the mind understands. Your fingers tighten around your spear shaft until wood creaks. You taste old smoke in your mouth, because the campfires never fully leave the tongue. Imagine the fog of war, thick as dust. You can't see the rebel center. You see only brown haze rolling along the road like a storm with legs. You hear drums that do not match your own, deeper, hungrier. A rider staggers in, bleeding under lamellar plates, screaming the flank is gone. Another rider slaps his horse and insists it is a feint. But both men wear the same fear. Therefore, truth becomes a coin you cannot test. You have seconds to choose who to believe, and you don't know if that choice matters or if the decision already happens elsewhere. Imagine the first arrows. You hear them before you see them, a thin tearing sound, like cloth ripping in the sky. You see shafts into wood, tick against stone like rain, therefore the rampart suddenly feels too low. You feel one arrow slice the air near your ear, and your skin crawls as if touched by a ghost. A man beside you takes one in the throat and folds without a sound, as if bones are removed. But there is no time for grief. Therefore you step over him because the living need the space. You feel sickness rise because survival demands a kind of betrayal. Imagine the line buckles. You see shields slam, bodies press, the formation warp like wet paper. You feel someone's shield edge smash into your ribs, and pain flashes white behind your eyes. You taste iron, your own blood, therefore the mouth becomes a battlefield. The press of bodies becomes a living thing, pushing, breathing, panicking. But the enemy's force is not only steel, it is momentum. Therefore, once the push begins, stopping it feels like stopping a river with hands. You don't know if reinforcements arrive. You only know the sound of your own breath turns animal. Imagine an order cuts through, retreat. Or maybe panic pretends to be an order. Either way, men move. Therefore you move. You run. You run downhill with dust coating your teeth, with sweat freezing at your temples, with the stink of fear and horse foam filling your nose. You see a man drop his helmet because it slows him, therefore pride becomes optional. You hear someone pray, someone curse, someone laugh in shock. But the worst sound is behind. The roar grows closer. Therefore the legs do not stop. Imagine looking back once. You see the pass, the throat of the empire, choked not by walls, but by fleeing men. You feel the horrible knowledge settle. A pass, once lost, cannot be politely regained. But the mind still tries to bargain. Therefore you tell yourself it is only a setback, only a rearrangement, only a temporary withdrawal. Yet the dust on your tongue tastes like permanence. Imagine reaching Chang'an again and seeing the capital still standing, but standing like a person right before fainting. You see gates open too wide, guards too few. You smell the city's familiar incense mixed with something new, the sharp stink of hurried packing, of fierce sweat in wealthy courtyards. You hear carts creak through streets at night, therefore privacy dissolves. The city's elegance remains on the surface, but underneath, the pulse races. You feel it in the way servants stop bowing fully, because even ritual feels expensive now. Imagine the imperial court begins to flee. You see officials clutch boxes of documents like life rafts, hugging bamboo cases to their chests as if paper floats. You hear horses scream when overloaded carts jolt over stones. You smell hot manure and panic. But nobody says openly that the capital is about to be occupied. Therefore, everyone speaks in half phrases: temporary move, strategic relocation, sacred safety. You feel anger flare, because words try to wallpaper a crack that splits the foundation. You don't know if staying means death or if leaving means betrayal. Imagine standing along the road south as the procession crawls. You see silk hems dragged into mud. You see soldiers push citizens back with spear shafts, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. But necessity always looks like cruelty to the one shoved. Therefore resentment blooms even among loyal faces. You hear a woman spit a curse at an official's cart. You feel the empire's unity fray like rope fibers snapping one by one. Imagine turning back toward Chang'an after the court vanishes down the road. You see the city's walls still proud, therefore the mind insists they protect. But walls protect only if men inside believe. You smell smoke trapped in winter air. You step through streets where doors stand open, where households abandon their own thresholds. You see a guqin lying in dirt, string snapped. You see torn books, hairpins broken, a child's shoe left in a puddle. Therefore you understand a golden age does not end in one dramatic crash. It ends in 1,000 dropped objects. Imagine the first rebel scouts appear like stains at the edge of vision. You see unfamiliar armor shapes, different banners, different ways of sitting a horse. You feel your throat close as if the air thickens. You hear a neighbor whisper, "Hide your uniform." But you do not know what counts as hiding when your posture itself betrays training. Therefore you move through your own streets like a stranger. You keep your gaze lowered because eyes draw attention. You feel the city's silence become loud. Imagine occupation begins not with a single scream, but with rules. You see checkpoints rise at intersections. You hear demands for identification. You smell cooking fires that burn strange fuel because good charcoal is gone. But the rebels do not look like monsters from stories. Therefore fear becomes worse, because the enemy looks like a man who could be a cousin. You don't know which face is loyal, which is hungry, which is watching you for a reward. Imagine a midnight knock. You hear it first, wood on wood, patient, confident. You feel your skin go cold. You see shadows under the door seem shift. But silence is also an answer. Therefore you hold your breath until your chest aches. The knock comes again, harder. You see your own hands shake in moonlight. You feel the urge to run, but running makes noise. Therefore you become still as furniture. Outside, a voice calls a name, maybe yours, maybe a neighbor's. You don't know if the sound ends in arrest or in a bribe. You only know that the Empire's law now wears a different boot. Imagine morning after, when the street pretends nothing happens. You see people step over last night's footprints as if they are trash. You smell stale smoke. You hear someone laugh too loudly because laughter acts like camouflage. But everyone counts food now, counts friends now, counts who talks to whom. Therefore, loyalty reshapes into something practical and sharp. Survival edits the soul without asking permission. Imagine months pass in this half-life. You see grain rot in warehouses that nobody dares open. You see fields outside the walls neglected because men fear leaving the gates. You smell burnt grain from a fire set by retreating hands. But hunger does not care which banner hangs from the tower. Therefore, hunger becomes the ruler. You watch cheeks hollow, tempers shorten, prayers turn transactional. You feel your own body shrink inside your clothes, therefore even identity feels looser, as if it might slip off and be taken. Imagine hearing distant news like thunder, outsiders called in, cavalry from far steppe lands, hired speed and hired violence. You hear whispers that the Tang calls Uyghur horsemen to help retake what is lost. But help is teeth. Therefore gratitude mixes with dread. You picture hooves on your streets that do not answer to your officials. You smell, in imagination, the sour sweat of unfamiliar horses in your markets. You don't know if rescue arrives as a shield or as a second occupation with better manners. Imagine another rumor. The rebel leader dies not in glorious battle, but by hands closest to him. You hear it in a back alley, traded for a bowl of soup. You see the teller glance around, because even good news can be dangerous. But that death does not rewind time. Therefore, relief feels thin, like watery porridge. You sense fractures inside the rebellion, yes, but fractures inside the empire too. You feel something irreversible. The knowledge that power can be seized, therefore power can be attempted again. Imagine retaking begins somewhere beyond the horizon. You don't see the banners change yourself, not at first. You only hear the city's rumors shift tone. The court returns, the rebels retreat, order restores. But order does not taste like it used to. Therefore victory arrives like a scar, not like a celebration. You step into a street once famous for poems and realize the poems now sound like ghosts. You feel your shoulders tense whenever a horse clops behind, because the mind learns new reflexes and refuses to unlearn them. Imagine the verdict, counted not in speeches, but in sensations. You smell burnt grain that takes years to leave the bricks. You see gaps where families vanish, doorways sealed, courtyards filled with weeds. You hear fewer instruments at night. But the dynasty still breathes. Therefore people call it survival. Yet survival costs something subtler than lives alone. You feel regional generals grow teeth, commanders in provinces acting like kings in all but name. You see the center's authority thin, like old silk wearing to transparency. Therefore the empire learns a new habit, bleeding without dying, surviving without shining. Imagine standing again by the wall where watchfires once multiply like a rash. The horizon looks ordinary now. You see farmers return to fields, therefore the earth performs healing. But the mind does not heal at the same speed. Therefore, every distant smoke plume triggers the old fear. You feel your hands remember the weight of a spear even when empty. You taste dust in memory, because the body archives what the court tries to forget. Imagine the modern mirror, not as a lecture, but as a chill that crawls up the spine. You see the pattern stamped into this case file. Collapse does not always arrive as an explosion. It arrives as carts jammed on a road, as orders that change mid-sentence, as leaders purging talent while an enemy advances, as a government forced to outsource survival. But outsourcing always leaves fingerprints. Therefore, the price is paid twice, once to the invader, once to the rescuer. You feel that truth settle like grit between teeth, small, constant, impossible to ignore. Imagine the legacy question, unanswerable by simple search, because it asks for judgment, not fact. You stand in Chang'an with red paper charms curling in cold air, and you stand in any modern city where systems feel smooth until they suddenly don't. You see how trust is a bridge that holds until one plank cracks. Therefore ask, when comfort begins to fail, when rumor outruns truth, when logistics choke, when leaders trade confidence for loyalty, do you cling to the lacquered bowl and pretend it cannot shatter? Or do you look for the first dropped object and admit the golden age already slips from the hands?